All righty. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the first Alta Pro free CLE webinar of 2022. We're really glad you're here, and we have another really great program for you today, which is all around the rapidly changing area of cannabis law. The webinar is entitled Basics of Cannabis Law, Chapter 1, From Ethics to Insurance. And to address these critical components of cannabis law, we are honored to have two of the industry's heavy hitters to give us their guidance and insight. The first is Kurshid Khohja of Sacramento, California. Now, Khurshid is the founder of Greenbridge Corporate Counsel, a minority-owned business law firm that represents clients in California and Hawaii in various sectors of the legal cannabis industry. He's the chair of the board of directors of the National Cannabis Industry Association, which is the oldest and largest cannabis trade organization in the country. Welcome, Khurshid, and again, it's an honor to have you with us. Also on the docket today is docket, no pun intended, Lisa Pitman, who hails from Austin in the great state of Texas. Now, Lisa's a pioneer in the field and who is widely known as the first lady of Texas cannabis law. She is also the chair of the American Bar Association's Cannabis Law and Policy Committee, as well as a non-resident fellow of the Drug Policy Program at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy. In fact, Lisa presented the ABA's first marijuana law CLE program in 2017. I don't know if she's, oh, there she is. She did pop in. Hi, Lisa. Great that you could make it, and it's an honor to have you. Now, as you guys probably can recognize here, hosting today's webinar is Jay Reeves, whom you all know as the Alta Pro Risk Pro. Jay is also a lawyer and runs the website yourlawlife.com, which is dedicated to helping lawyers achieve work-life balance. Jay is also the author of the book, The Most Powerful Attorney in the World. All right, so now it's time for a little housekeeping that you guys are familiar with. So let me ask Ben to forward on to that slide so I can go over them with you. First thing is check your chat box for regular messages from the Master of Ceremonies behind the scenes, Ben. You got to complete the survey to receive your credit. The survey will pop up automatically at the end of this webinar. You can also get it by just emailing us, and we can send it to you if you miss it that way. There are going to be two codes sent across during the course of the webinar. These are the codes that you will have to write down and enter into your survey, where we can validate that you were in fact watching the entire session. All right, so that's you must fill those fields in. Now, if you're participating by phone or maybe sharing a screen with a colleague in an office, you'll need to complete the PDF form to receive the CLE credit. I believe we're going to send that form over via the chat box. And if you don't have it, just email us, we'll get it over to you. I saw that the first code word was also just sent across, so you might want to write that down. Again, allow 30 days for the CLE to be processed because that's basically how long it takes. If you need something sooner, we can fast track on your behalf. Just let us know. And the last thing is we want to encourage you to ask questions, and we're sure you're going to have a lot. So just throw them out in the chat box, in the Q&A portion of the webinar host, and we will probably spend the last 10 minutes or so dedicated towards the top questions that we get. All righty, so with that, I think we're ready to turn this over to the Master of Ceremonies here, Jay Reeves. Take it away, Jay.
Thank you, Todd. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Alta Pro CLE Live. My name is Jay Reeves. I'm better known to many of you as the Risk Pro. This guy is the on-call practice management consultant for lawyers and firms insured through your host, Alta Pro Insurance Services. And I've got to tell you, I woke up this morning, I jumped out of bed, feeling great. I said, I am the luckiest man alive. I'm here, I'm above ground, I'm with all of you. I feel lucky. And I get to be the moderator of another Alta Pro webinar. These things are fun, and they're also popular because we present them on topics you tell us you want to hear about, and we bring in top talent to teach you on these topics. And then you show up, which makes it all work. And Ben, I think you said we had close to what, 500 or so registering for this program, 500 lawyers and legal professionals from Sacramento to Cincinnati to St. Paul. That's wonderful. Here at lunchtime to learn about the basics of cannabis law. So I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm guessing that all across the country, people are enjoying lunches of Cheetos and Twinkies and maybe White Castle burgers and such. At any rate, we have high hopes for this program coming up. And I am just buzzed to talk to two of the very top celebrity lawyers in the cannabis law space. They're not only thought leaders, but they're also practitioners. And they come from different experiences and backgrounds. So they'll have some different insights to share with you. And they work with, belong to, and actually help lead two of the leading legal industry organizations associated with cannabis law. So that's exciting for me to get a chance to talk with our speakers. And they'll be able to answer all of your questions like, what exactly is cannabis law? Is there a practice possibility for my law firm? How do I get started? And dude, where's my car? All of your questions will be answered. But mostly, I'm feeling lucky today. Mostly, I'm feeling lucky because it's March Madness. And forgive a brief digression, but some of you may know this. We're down to the final 4 teams in the NCAA men's tournament, and 2 of those 4 teams are in my neighborhood. The University of North Carolina is about a mile that way. Duke University is about 15 minutes that way. Not only that, but when they meet on Saturday, it will be historic. Coach K's last season and the first time UNC and Duke have ever met in the Final Four. So I'm not blowing smoke when I tell you that there's a buzz in the air. And what I'm smelling is continuing legal education. That's what we're here for. I keep having to get focused on that. So let's get started here. And as you know, this is a discussion format, and we want our audience to be involved not only by asking questions through chat, but also interacting with our polling questions during the program. So let's start with, why did you sign up for this program? And while we're waiting for that question to be answered and for the results to come in, I'm going to start with Lisa. First of all, thank you for being here. I think I read in your bio that you presented one of the first, if not the first, CLEs on cannabis law for the American Bar Association some time ago. So tell us, what do you mean when you use the term cannabis law? And you need to unmute. We can't hear you.
I just figured that out. Sorry about that. I wanted to know, who's your money on, North Carolina or Duke?
Well, I'm wearing the colors, but the Ultra Pro colors has both the Tar Heel blue and Duke blue. So,
covering your bases. That's good risk management. All right. Well, cannabis law really refers to a whole lot of things. You know, generally, it refers to if you're involved in a state compliant cannabis program, and you've got to know all of the regulations, all of the licensing requirements. You've got to help your clients overcome some obstacles we'll probably discuss later, such as ultra high taxation and all cash business, because banks aren't permitted to, if the FDIC bank, you know, that exposes them to money laundering and violation of the Bank Secrecy Act and RICO, other federal crimes, because marijuana is still federally illegal. So we have this tension between the federal and the state law. So you also have to become a bit of a legal scholar as well, because most of law that we're familiar with is looking backwards 200 years and seeing, you know, what has been decided in the past. But here we are in the process of helping to shape those new laws. And so that's another aspect of it, because we are in this intense period of new laws and evolving laws, sometimes laws that change every day. You have to also be kind of a pure legal analysis and divine, how is this going to work in the future? How is this going to be argued to my client's benefit before a judge in the future? So it's really fascinating. It's really intellectually fulfilling, because you do get to be so central to the formation of these new laws. I don't really subscribe to the notion that someone is a cannabis attorney. I think that you are either a litigator, a corporate counsel, an IP attorney, whatever your traditional practice is. And typically you would apply those skills to the cannabis industry, just like if you're a litigator and you're litigating construction defect and you've got to learn all about steel buildings. It's like that. It's just learning your client's industry inside and out, applying your special skills. In my case, I'm a commercial litigator. And so representing a lot of these cannabis and hemp companies, because they're new, because it's a new industry, they're startups. So it was a little like getting out of law school again, where you learn by doing. I had to learn how to set up corporate structure, operating agreements. I can negotiate contracts like nobody's business because I litigated broken ones for so long. So I've been able to apply all of my past experiences over the past 25 years, including working in water law for a little while. So that regulatory experience really helped, and understanding administrative law. So it really encompasses a lot of things. So in 2016, I had been involved in this for about a year. And so I pitched to the American Bar Association, we should have a CLE on these marijuana law issues. At that time, we just had, I think, Colorado and Washington as adult use states. It was still brand new. There was still a lot of skepticism and stigma and so forth. So my pitch couldn't be how to be a cannabis lawyer. It had to be, how are cannabis issues or legalization of cannabis going to affect your practice in what you normally do? And for example, landlord-tenant law. If the tenant is a dispensary in Colorado and you want to go evict them, you can't get into your own property unless you have a badge from the regulatory agency of Colorado that oversees marijuana licensing and regulation. So there's a lot of little tricky things that attorneys should be aware of if they're in a legal state, even if they have no intention of actually practicing in the cannabis and hemp area.
Thank you, Lisa. So broad field, broad area, kind of wide open there. Khurshid, I'm going to ask you the same question. What do you mean sort of by cannabis law? What does it encompass, and sort of how did you get there? But before I do, I would just draw your attention to the answers. That in fact is what our audience wants to find out, at least 55%. What is cannabis law? Yeah. And a good chunk of them want to find out what are the skills required and want to explore growth. And I found it interesting that 7% are in, said, I'm a medical marijuana patient or know someone who is and want to learn more about that. So when we talk about marijuana or cannabis law, it's not just one thing. There's medical marijuana, there's adult use, there's hemp. And anyway, so Khurshid, tell me, thanks for being here and tell me about cannabis law.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. So, I guess I'll dovetail a bit on Lisa's comment about, there's not really a cannabis lawyer, right? There's not really a cannabis law per se. People are transactional lawyers, regulatory lawyers, litigators, and they are applying their skill set to this new industry, right? And I would say, I don't even say that we have a cannabis practice. I say that we have a cannabinoid practice, because we represent hemp businesses that are lawful under the Farm Bill. We represent, of course, licensed cannabis businesses in the adult use market, medical market in California, and we represent biotech companies and pharmaceutical companies that are, doing things like biosynthesizing cannabinoids from non-plant material, right? And so I don't look at it as a cannabis industry so much as a cannabinoid industry, and I think Lisa's spot on in saying that it's really about the discipline that you have. It's a multidisciplinary area. Because basically, it's just like any other business, right? It's going to encounter the same issues that any other business does, really, except for the fact that we still have federal illegality. And so that is a big, big difference, of course. But otherwise, it's really about applying your skill set to this new industry. And so, I would say, though, to me, I guess cannabis law means something a little bit broader than just sort of, how do you deal with businesses in the regulated market? Because for me, I became a cannabis reform activist in 2002, so roughly 20 years ago, starting in law school. I had my first, drug law seminar at Berkeley. And knew about the violation of individual rights, but the civil rights catastrophe that was unfolding as a result of cannabis prohibition had been unfolding for decades, was not something that I had really grappled with before. And so that's when I became involved, and that predated all we had at that point. We had implementing legislation. I'm sorry, we had. We had legislation in California, Prop 215, that allowed for medical cannabis, but we didn't have any kind of state regulatory system, any kind of licensing at all. Adult use was way off, and so I got involved at the point where we were still actually protesting in the streets in Oakland and San Francisco against the U.S. attorneys taking action against medical cannabis providers in the Bay Area. That's where I started my practice. And so to me, it's a little bit broader than just dealing with licensing and regulatory, because you really are looking at risk management at the end of the day, right? These folks were engaged in, prior to licensing, these folks were engaged in civil disobedience from my perspective. And that's what I was helping with. So to me, it was an intensely political practice at the outset. It began as a movement and became an industry, right? And now we kind of have a little bit of a divergence from those two, the movement and industry, where a lot of folks who are in industry now just don't have those roots, right? They weren't fighting in the streets. They weren't witnessing their friends getting arrested. They weren't witnessing, smash and grab raids by the DEA and local cops, civil asset forfeiture, the whole 9 yards. It was rough. It was rough, and it was scary. And so, cannabis law has gotten a lot easier in the past few years, since we've gone from 0 adult use states when I started to now we have 37 states with some form of legalized cannabis, medical or adult. And so, I think it's you had to have a lot more skin in the game early on, and had to be concerned with things like ethics, which I know we'll talk about later on as well. So that's kind of what it means to me. It's really kind of a intensely political practice way for me to apply my transactional regulatory skill set, which I had from practice at the big firms, to an area that essentially was social entrepreneurship and civil disobedience.
We're still in that stage in Texas. So,
unfortunately,
yeah. So that's kind of those same things are still occurring and still playing out in Texas. So, yeah, it involves a lot of government affairs work as well, and a lot of advocacy on helping to get these laws passed, session after session. In Texas, we don't have voter initiatives. So we only get new laws through the legislature, and the legislature only meets every other year. So it's a little slow going here. So we're still in that stage.
Right. So state specific, that's one huge takeaway. 37 states, Kurshid, to your point, some form of legalization, 37 states. And what I heard is it's sort of an amorphous, broad area. It's certainly not clearly defined like family law or bankruptcy law. It's evolving sort of as we go. And my question is sort of, I'm an observer, I'm not an expert. Is it growing? Are people rushing into open Joe Smith's or Jane Smith's cannabis law practice, whether or not they sort of know what that is? Is it a growing area?
I absolutely. I mean, we're now at a point where, it's a legitimate practice area. Kids going to law school right now can sort of aspire to be that, right? I've spoken to law school classes now that, it's not it doesn't blow their head off to think about, oh, I could be a cannabis lawyer. It would have blown my head off, certainly, to hear when I was in law school, hey, you could actually be a cannabis industry attorney. We didn't have a cannabis industry. We had a movement, right? And so it was not a foregone conclusion that we would be where we are at now, right? So one of my very first clients was in the crosshairs of the DEA. Early on the harbor side. So they were threatening to take the founder and imprison him for life and do all sorts of nasty things to him. It's gotten a lot easier in that you don't have the same, threat perception as an attorney, right? You're not as worried about your ability to practice. You're not as worried about your reputation. It doesn't sound like this is a crazy thing, right? Like if you had said to somebody in my class, there's going to be a whole cannabis bar, that would have been ludicrous, right? And so it's a different time now where I think the reality is there now. Lawyers who have practiced in the field have built it for them, and so that's where we're at now. And so I think it's because it feels safer. A lot of firms that including my own, my own firm that I was working at in 2011 fired me for hosting a cannabis angel investor forum. And that was enough to get me canned, right? And I entered the practice at a time where the Obama administration was vacillating on whether they were going to prosecute medical cannabis providers or not. And they had, policies that said, hey, the Cole memos, if you follow these guidelines and you enforce your state laws, and they're robust state laws, we're going to leave you alone, right? But not everyone played along. And so, U.S. attorneys in California were nothing doing, right? They went straight ahead and continued to prosecute. And so, I had to worry about things like, well, are they going to come after me as well? Am I going to get my home office busted into while they're looking for documents, et cetera? And like I had seen my clients, like literally I had seen one client get rated on the, this is when Jim Lehrer was hosting the PBS NewsHour. So it was called, I think it was still called McNeil Lehrer NewsHour. But I actually got to see my clients get busted, and rated. And so that was a consideration. And it's not a consideration anymore. So you do see a lot of firms stepping up, a lot of big firms stepping up now and saying, oh, well, these are public companies, they're licensed, that risk perception is greatly reduced now. So yes, we're seeing a lot of folks enter the field.
I wanted to jump in. While that's true in California, because they've had, medical going back into the 90s, it's may seem safer. They've got their adult use now and so forth. Whenever a state legalizes, typically the first thing that the state bar will do is come out and say, attorneys, you cannot advise cannabis businesses because they're federally illegal and you're aiding, abetting a federal crime. And then the attorneys will have to go up through the Supreme Court of their state to get that changed and get some kind of a declaration, which then may come down with conditions like, okay, the attorney cannot have a medical card or own a business or something like that. And so every state's going to have a different take on that. In Texas, I'm kind of out on a limb because we're only in the infancy of a medical program. And, I've just kind of been doing it because I really got involved in this for personal reasons because of the medical benefits. And so, when I read the cynical testimony of mothers with children with epilepsy, which is what our law was first for, and I saw the treatment choices they were having to make, maybe leaving their families and schools and communities to go seek treatment in another state, or maybe they didn't have the means to do so, that just really lit a fire under me to get involved. And at the time, I had been doing commercial litigation for 15 years. I was little bit tired of it. It was kind of thankless. It didn't really go along with my personality of wanting to help people. And so I kind of decided at the time, well, I don't care if I lose my law license, really. I want to stand up and do what's right here and see what I can do to further this movement in Texas. So if you want to get involved in it, that's one of the first things you need to check on is, where is my state in the legalization process? Have they come out with any opinions of whether it's okay or not to practice in this area? And are there any limitations to that? And you do still face some risk. I mean, there was an incident in San Diego where an attorney's, I don't really know the whole situation, but there were some attorney-client privileges that ended up breached because of a raid based on something else with one client. So you've really got to think through all of these moving parts if you want to get involved with this.
Well, and let me chime in. As a risk manager and malpractice lawyer, definitely know the laws of your state with something as state specific and evolving as rapidly as the laws and regulations related to marijuana and related products. I find it interesting that Khurshid, you and Lisa both came to practicing cannabis law, which isn't, it's a pretty broad thing, came to it from a position sort of advocacy. Khurshid, yours for real advocacy, and Lisa, yours medical, medical advocacy and care for loved ones is what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
So that's interesting that can bring to an area of law. Advocacy and activism and even civil disobedience under the umbrella of cannabis law. Other thoughts on this point? And specifically, yeah.
Go ahead, Lisa.
Oh, I was going to say, when I had built a big network on LinkedIn before this. And so there were a lot of attorneys, mostly attorneys. And so in 2015, 16, I started putting out articles about different cannabis topics, what cannabis can do, laws, things like that. I would get no likes. Some of my colleagues would disconnect with me. I would see the U.S. attorney in Texas looking at my profile. So, this stuff, I was like, but then, a year or two goes by and I'm starting to get a few more likes. Today I have like over 7,000 followers and I get, thousands of views and hundreds of likes. It's just evolved so differently. And I view it as being a musician. You start off at open mic night and you put your songs out there and nobody's there, but you just have to keep believing in what you're doing and keep putting it out there and being confident in what you're doing. And eventually you'll draw some supporters and then you'll get fans. And then, if you work really hard, maybe you'll become a rock star. And so that's kind of how I feel about it. It's been such a great evolution just in Texas since I've gotten involved with this. And, to kind of touch on the reputational, how do your colleagues, they've come around, and I give a lot of CLEs. And for the first few years, every one of them came with, are you going to bring samples? And I don't get that so much anymore. It is now seen as a legitimate, credible practice area. And that was really my motivation in getting that into the American Bar Association, was to bring legitimacy across the most traditional attorneys that we've got in our country.
Lisa, thank you.
Go ahead, Jake.
No, you, Khurshid.
I would add there that, there was a time, that I would get laughed at ABA events when I went and told people what I did, right? And God help me if I met a U.S. attorney in the course of that. That was always a fun exchange. But I would go to bar association conferences and tell people what I did. And for the longest time, I would get one of two reactions, right? Well, three, actually. I would get, someone would just completely disconnect and say, you are radioactive, and just sort of walk away. You'd get the Cheech and Chong jokes, you'd get the free sample jokes and stuff like that, right? And it was like, all right, whatever. And then you would actually, once in a while, you would get somebody who would actually look at you and go like, wow, how do I do that? And so, and that number, that ratio of, three different types of lawyers is definitely more weighted now towards, oh, gee, how do I do that, right? And no one's laughing now. But there was a time where, it was very difficult to get acceptance, among peers doing this. I mean, part of the reason that I was let go after hosting that angel investor forum was, I'd been told before, like, hey, look, no one's going to want to work with you, right? They're going to think you're a stoner, and no one's going to want to work with you. And this is, we represent liquor, we represent pharmaceuticals, no one's going to take you seriously. And it was already not that easy for a Muslim American immigrant origin attorney to get a warm welcome at a big law firm, right? So it was already kind of working with some challenges there, and to add this, people just wrote me off, right? And so luckily there were other colleagues that were doing this work prior to it becoming accepted, and they were kind of the vanguard, right? They were a movement again, and so prior to the ABA taking on starting a committee and doing CLEs, we for a few years had the International Cannabis Bar Association, which I think is still exists. I helped the founding group, and I think I gave their first CLE in like 2014 or so on California law. The terrain has definitely changed quite a bit. Reputational concerns are still there, especially if you're in an early state that doesn't have any legislation. You are going to probably have to go the activist route, and you're going to, unless you have that commitment, unless you really want to push that, it may not be the right move for you. If you're working in an established state where they already have licensing and regulations, and you're a regulatory attorney or a business attorney, that might be an easier lift for you. It depends on where you are.
Yeah, I was so motivated that because we didn't get any change in our law in 2017, I just hauled off and moved to Colorado for a couple of years so that I could immerse myself in a state where it's legal, so I could learn what the issues are, gain experience, meet all the kingpins, if you will, expand my network, and learn it so I could bring it back to Texas to represent Texans. And there was really no substitute for that in the trenches experience, especially with the shenanigans going on in hemp out there. I don't recommend anybody else do that, but that's what I did. I was fully committed. This is what I want to do, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to make it happen.
I'm going to jump in here, and Khurshid, I'm not going to point out that I believe you said the joint has changed over the years. I'm sure the pun was unintended. Lisa, a few minutes ago, you gave what to me is just good advice, good life advice, period, which is to find something that you're interested in, that motivates you, that you have a desire in, and go for it and create your own space. And what I find fascinating about having you two on the program is I'm the old guy here. And for me to see the change in pot laws from back in the early 70s when I came of age to now has just been interesting. But I knew very little about how the legal space is creating, because of course there has to be lawyers and laws and a whole legal industry attached to the growth of and change in the cannabis, hemp, CBD industry. And you guys are sort of making the law, and that has to be exciting. You're kind of making it up and plowing ahead. So it's exciting for me to hear that. And finally, before I pitch it back to you guys, let's talk a little bit about some of the risks. Here's the results of our second audience polling question, and they have concerns about reputational cost. It may be legal, but is it the right thing, or is it a smart thing? So that's sort of the reputational thing. And they've got concerns about practical concerns, opening bank accounts, obtaining insurance, making money. I know, Lisa, you can address, Khurshid, of course, you too can address all of that, because we hear on the news these, you can't, banks won't take your money, et cetera, et cetera. So tell us a little bit about some of the concerns out there and address any of these issues that you'd like.
Kurshid?
Sure. Yeah. I guess I will start with the reputational. Yes. I mean, if you're in a state where, the laws are not advanced, there's not a thriving movement for legalization, people may look at you, like you're from Mars if you tell them what you're doing, right? And so you really have to, you kind of have to have skin in the game, right? You have to be committed to this and basically not care about the reputational concerns. I mean, if that's going to drive you, then this is probably not the right field for you, at least in that context where things are just starting to build up momentum. In terms of banking, that's a very, very real risk, right? And so I have, in addition to being the now chair emeritus of the NCIA board of directors, our main thrust has been to try to get banking and tax reform in Congress for state legal businesses, and it's been a tough haul. I've served on the California State Treasurer's Cannabis Banking Working Group as well, and ironically, that's when I got my bank account shut down. The folks who were at Umpqua Bank had caught wind that I was on this working group that certainly had gotten some press as well. This working group had, and so people were aware of it. And all of a sudden, after having banked with this bank for 4 or 5 years, I got a questionnaire that basically asking for all sorts of confidential client information, asking me to identify my clients and how much money they'd paid me, and et cetera, et cetera. And that my bank account would get shut down if I didn't provide this information to them. So I luckily had some friends at the state bar, a former state bar president who was my con law professor and later ambassador to Australia. He was able to connect me with the state bar folks to basically see if there was any kind of recourse, if the state bar would come to the defense and say, hey, you can't ask our attorneys who have IOLTA trust accounts with you to disclose this information. This is just not, you can't have it. So I told them to go pound sand. They shut down my bank account. And I had to go and start a new bank account. And I had to go, I went to like 5 or 6 different banks, and, I had to be totally honest about what I was doing and be open and transparent about that. You don't really have much of a choice other than, I guess, walking out of an interview. But I finally got a bank account, and I guard that, as one of the chief assets that we have in our practice is our bank account. I have to be able to take trust deposits. I have to be able to pay my attorneys. I have to be able to pay myself. And so, banking is a huge area of potential exposure. And so, and that's not fixed yet. That is still out there. So potentially everybody who's in the industry, including service providers, arguably has liability for money laundering. I mean, it is what it is.
I can speak about these things from the client perspective. Similarly, for cannabis or even hemp businesses, even though hemp is federally legal, hemp is the cannabis plant. Hemp and marijuana are both from the cannabis plant. And just legally, hemp is 0.3% Delta 9 THC or under. But if you're at 0.4%, well, then you have marijuana. So hemp has only been legal since 2019, so it's still brand new. So to insurance companies, it is still a high risk, along with guns, liquor, topless bars, and it's got to come from a specialty provider, usually in excess or surplus lines. So, one of the things that I need to do for my clients is help them to get insurance, help them to strategize on that insurance. There's some different cannabinoid products. Some of them are controversial. For example, there's one called Delta 8, and it comes from hemp. I'm not sure if you've heard about it, but it's, it's kind of a dicey legal area. So in some cases, but people are making a lot of money off it right now. So I might have a hemp CBD business that wants to start carrying Delta 8, but if they do that, they're going to lose their insurance. They're going to have to go with another carrier. They're going to have to pay really high premiums and not really get much coverage. So sometimes I'll have them separate, have your regular hemp business here and your little Delta 8 business over here separate. Delta 8 might not be around long anyway. I mean, we have to do a lot of that, risk mitigation and things like that when it comes to doing business in these controlled substances or almost controlled substances. So, that's something I've got to work hard on with my clients. But it's pretty easy because I spent over 10 years representing insurance companies, insurance coverage litigation when they're denying claims and so forth. So I know how to read a policy back to front with all the exclusions, endorsements, etc., and know, what you're getting at the end of the day. And same thing for banks. That's one of the things I was doing in Colorado to expand my network, was including insurance brokers, bankers, CPAs, all these folks with the special professional knowledge to help folks who are in this risky, complicated, new area of law where taxation, for example, if you are a marijuana company, you cannot deduct your ordinary necessary business expenses. You can only deduct cost of goods sold. So you end up being taxed at an 80% rate, and you've got to have a CPA who knows how to strategize to minimize your tax liability. So there are just so many issues. I don't feel that I'm just in the legal bucket anymore. People aren't coming to me just for law advice. They need their hand held through all sorts of business situations. And a lot of these people, maybe it's the first time they ever had a business, or maybe it's their side hustle and they want to see, where they can take it. So they need a lot of that just general business advice that doesn't even have anything to do with cannabis. But then you add this overlay on top of it. And, I'll give you another example of strategies you have to come up with to do with banking. If you name your marijuana farm, Green Day Farms or something like that, and even if your bank is okay with that, let's say you pay your employee and the check says Green Day Farms on it, so their bank takes a look at it and like, hey, and they'll cut off that employee's bank account. So that kind of thing happens a lot. Or a business might have assurances from its banker that, yeah, you're good. But then 6 months later, the anti-money laundering officer looks at the account and says, hey, wait a minute, this is marijuana, or I think this is illegal, drop the account. So you've always got to have these plan Bs and Cs in place to help your clients just get through the day sometimes.
Yeah.
Lisa,
There's only 7% of banks now currently bank the industry, just 7%. So there is some guidelines. There are some guidelines from the Department of Treasury on how to bank these types of businesses, but it doesn't really give the banks that much comfort. And so as a result, you see, a very small minority of banks actually servicing these businesses and charging very exorbitant fees in the process as well.
Yeah. Let me jump in and thank Lisa for using the word risk several times in your as you were talking, because I am a risk manager, and when I practiced law, I represented lawyers who were in trouble with the bar or malpractice, and often it was because they took a case they shouldn't have taken. They dabbled. They thought they could handle a case, and they didn't know what they were doing. And Lisa, you also stressed the importance of education. You moved to Colorado to educate yourself on cannabis law. You wanted to be on the ground where it was happening. So the importance of education, no dabbling, know what you're doing, do your research. This is a basic course. So we're highlighting the issues. You have to do your research. We're also getting a lot of questions. I'm going to throw one out because I'd like to answer some of the audience questions. One says, what about cryptocurrency in the cannabis industry?
Yeah, I happy to have. I think that there's a lot of promise in cryptocurrency, especially given our banking situation. We've now had the Safe Banking Act pass in the House multiple times, and the Senate has not moved on it, right? And so we still have cannabis businesses that have a lot of cash lying around that cannot bank properly and are getting attacked, right? They are targets for violent criminal burglaries, and it's not safe. And so I think crypto is a potential solution. I wrote an op-ed after I was very, very frustrated with congressional inactions. I wrote an op-ed for CoinDesk back in November saying basically, like, hey, you guys aren't the only game in town. So if you're not going to make this available to state legal businesses, we can go elsewhere. Don't think that we won't. I used to be a lot less cavalier about it. I would tell my clients, and this is when, people would associate crypto with like Silk Road and all sorts of, unlawful transactions, drug transactions. I would tell my clients, hey, break one law at a time, or appear to be breaking one law at a time, right? Like, don't go on here. You might not like the result, right? And so I think times have certainly changed since then. And so I've definitely, I guess I'll say I've drunk the Kool-Aid, right? I believe in Bitcoin, I believe in crypto, I believe in that future, and I think that is the direction that we need to go in as an industry for financial services at the very least. There are other applications as well. Decentralized autonomous organizations, Web3 holds a lot of promise for organizing activism and companies as well.
I agree with everything he said, and it's interesting because crypto is a developing law too.
Yep.
I remember, I think it might have been 2016 or so, a long time ago, researching whether or not it would be considered a security or not. Okay, well, now the position is out there that it is, right? But that it's a great solution, so I hope we get there.
Not all cryptos are securities, and that still is being litigated right now, right? Ethereum and Bitcoin are not considered securities, or at least per the SEC, and the SEC is still battling it out with Ripple right now over, was XRP a security? So it's live, and your Lisa's absolutely right. There are a lot of parallels to cannabis law, and that it's sort of happening in front of you. You are building the law as you move forward.
I love it. I thank you. I would address both of your attention to the Q&A section, because we've gotten some really, really good questions, and I would hate to wrap up the program and anyone's question not get answered. I'll try to throw a few out there to both of you. But one question was, and I'll just throw this out, is who are the clients? You representing dispensaries? Is it who are the clients? At least on your website, you have lists of clients you represent, and you call them plant touching companies, farmers, manufacturers, distributors, but there are all sorts of chains, because this is a big business. So who are the clients?
I mean, it's I think another aspect of being involved in this area is that you represent a lot of different people doing a lot of different things, because there aren't that many people, lawyers with expertise in this area. So I represent investors, farmers, retailers, manufacturers, distributors. I work in competitive medical marijuana licenses in new states, nonprofits. I mean, it's all kinds of clients, and it's marijuana and it's hemp. I work in a lot of the surrounding states with marijuana, or I help Texans invest into other state marijuana companies. You also have ancillary services, and those are businesses that exist to help the cannabis industry, such as grow lights, or there's the picks and shovels of the industry. So they have a little bit easier time with banking and insurance and all of that stuff. The further away you get from what's called touching the plant, when you're the one actually growing it or manufacturing it or retailing it.
I'd say in addition to the licensed businesses and the ancillary businesses that serve them, Lisa mentioned the hemp companies that are legal under the Farm Bill, 2018 Farm Bill. 2018 Farm Bill basically descheduled hemp and removed it from the definition of marijuana, and also removed any cannabinoids other than Delta-9, THC, from the list of prohibited substances. And so there's hemp companies, and then there's also, pharmaceutical and biotech companies. I mentioned biosynthesis of cannabinoids. There are companies that are producing rare and novel cannabinoids for research and pharmaceutical development, where the cannabinoids are not derived from plant source. They're not derived from what's marijuana under the Controlled Substances Act, or even hemp. There's no plant source whatsoever. And so, unless you are biosynthesizing THC, it's wide open for you, right? And so there are a number of those companies that are active and trying to build a pharmaceutical market for cannabinoids. And there are a few drugs now. Epidiolex is the one that actually has marijuana-derived cannabinoids in it. Before that, there was Marinol, which is synthetic, THC essentially. And so, that's going to speed up. And I think that is what I'm really, really excited about, is finding, these rare and novel cannabinoids, these new to man cannabinoids, and deploying them in the field to improve human welfare. I think that, I am excited about what's going to happen in med schools. I'm excited about what's going to happen in that field.
I want to jump in there real quick, because with all these new, novel, rare, synthetic cannabinoids, I saw somebody ask a question about HHC. I don't remember that much about chemistry in 10th grade, but I've had to brush up on it, because a lot of these questions of law, whether something is legal under the Farm Bill or not, depends on chemistry. And then researching everything that the DEA has said prior about XYZ or about a synthetic. And so, kind of as I mentioned earlier, it's not just law in the legal bucket. You've really got to learn about a lot of things. But as I mentioned, it's fun. To me, it's fun to learn new things.
Fun to learn new things. Both of you have mentioned Delta 8, Delta 9. We had one question from an attendee. What's the diff? Either one of you can answer that one. I can't.
I deal with it a lot in Texas. Delta 8, it is an isomer of Delta 9 THC. Delta 9 is what we're all familiar with, what gets you high. And Delta 8 supposedly makes you feel less high, but gives you a little bit of a body relax or something like that. So it has similar properties. So for instance, in determining whether or not this is legal under the Farm Bill, I did a lot of research and analysis, and I concluded, based on the language of the definition of hemp under the Farm Bill, that this is arguably legal. You can't ever say that it's legal or not. But then in this case, it is susceptible to prosecution under the Analog Act. And there's a federal one and there's state ones, where if you are making something to mimic a controlled substance, or you're making something illegal like that, you can be prosecuted for that. So there's all kinds of different issues involved in this.
Yeah. The Delta 8, Delta 9 thing is really interesting, because I think advocates for hemp did something really crafty when they were negotiating the 2018 Farm Bill, in that they defined hemp in terms of its Delta 9 THC content solely, right? So no other isomers, even though the DEA, if you look at the DEA's orange book that has all the scheduled substances, they basically say it's THC and any isomer of THC, right? Delta 8, Delta 9, doesn't matter to us. To us, it's prohibited, right? But the federal law only calls out Delta 9. And so you have this sort of gray area still, where the DEA has one opinion, but the law actually says Delta 9. So, it's interesting to see that play out. And I think ultimately, I think it is going to result in an amendment to the Farm Bill. I just don't see any other way, short of course, full descheduling of cannabis, marijuana, and THC, which, is hopefully going to happen in the next, I don't know, I used to say 10 years ago, about 10 years ago, and now I still feel like it's 10 years from now, given the way politics works in DC.
Thanks, Khurshid. The federal legislation proposed last year, we had a question, what's your forecast on that? You might have already addressed that, but the legislation last year, what's?
So there's quite a bit of legislation, pending in Congress on cannabis. That what they're probably referring to, I assume, is the Cannabis Administration and Opportunity Act. That is the bill that Senator Schumer, Senator Booker, and I think it's Senator Wyden are going to be, they've introduced a draft. They've sort of circulated that for comment several months ago. NCIA, my trade association that I helped to lead, submitted, very voluminous comments on the CAOA. It's going to be probably introduced formally in May, is what we hear. And right now, there's a kind of some infighting going on basically amongst advocates for legalization, right? Where you have folks who are pragmatic incrementalists who are saying, hey, look, we have the votes to get safe banking passed. We probably have the votes to get other incremental reforms passed. We should get these passed, right? That's going to help everybody, including people of color, including social equity applicants. And then you have folks on the, who are more on the reform and advocacy side who are saying, no, if you open up, if you allow these big companies to get banking, and right now we have cannabis companies that are multi-state operators that are publicly traded, right? I mean, a lot of my clients who used to be little collectives prior to the law are now publicly traded, MSOs, right? And so I think that sorry, I lost my train of thought there. Lisa, if you pick up there, but that's right. We're talking about legislation, and so I think there's this tension between the pragmatists and the idealists who say, look, no, we can't let the barn door open. We can't have the floodgates open and allow big business to take over the cannabis industry. There still needs to be a place for people who actually suffered from prohibition, right? And the record is replete with evidence showing that the drug war, especially the modern drug war, cannabis prohibition was waged against communities of color, explicitly so. It's one big giant equal protection violation, right, from my perspective. And so in order to remedy that, we need to make sure that there are, folks who are communities that were harmed actually get to now participate in that economy. It would be, immoral to say, well, we locked you up for doing the same thing. Now we're going to let the CEO, make a $100 million bonus and go off and float away on his yacht, and you're still sitting in prison rotting, right? No, I mean, that's unacceptable as well. And so I think there needs to be there needs to be a compromise there. But in the meantime, I think there are businesses, small mom and pop businesses, businesses owned by community, by minority entrepreneurs that are suffering, that are at threat of being subject to violent robberies, right? And so we have to find a way to compromise and to move the industry forward. And then, yes, but we also need descheduling, and we also need social equity as well. So I'll get off my soapbox and let Lisa chime in.
Well, you can get off your soapbox because we're almost out of time, and I'm going to ask each of you for some concluding thoughts, just some final thoughts. There's some questions in the Q&A section addressed to you individually. You may want to look at them. Lisa, one was hemp startup companies in Texas, and I know you're on a hemp advisory board or council, so take a look at the questions. But final thoughts. Thank you both for coming. Final thoughts, Kurshid.
I would say if this is something that you're passionate about, if you are passionate about the plant, if you are passionate about medical cannabis, if you've seen what it can do and you believe in it, you should do this. You will not forgive yourself if you have the opportunity and you don't take it. So if you have the opportunity and you have the passion, dive in. And certainly feel free to email me, call me. I'm happy to chat with you.
And thanks so much for being here. Lisa, final thoughts?
That's my same attitude. I finally found a way to merge my passion for helping people who are ill with my profession of being a lawyer. And I have other things that I want to do with this in the future. But, I also have the same attitude in life generally. Do it, or I don't want to look back and regret that I didn't give it a shot. Because, there is a new day if it doesn't work out, but there is great reward in it. And I have to say, before I mentioned, trying cases for thankless corporations where I didn't help anybody other than a company's bottom line, I get great satisfaction out of helping people's goals and dreams come true.
Well, thanks both of you for being here. Wonderful program. I thank you for being here. Thanks to all of you for attending. Go Heels. Tossing it back over to Todd.
Wow, that was one of the most interesting webinars that I've actually witnessed, and I'm not even the audience. That was tremendously fantastic stuff. It's great to see such passion from professionals such as yourself. So I want to express collectively our sincere gratitude to both you, Lisa, and Kurshid. Thank you so much. We're going to have you guys back on at some point. I think that's what I think is going to come out of this. But anyway, you're both great, delivered valuable, timely information to all the folks that are participating. I want to thank you, Jay, for hosting this great session. We especially want to extend a big thank you to all the participants. But before I let you go, just don't forget, you need to complete the survey. It's going to happen it's going to pop up at the end of this webinar. You can input the words. I've seen some chats coming back. What are the code words? Well, here they are: free CLE, free CLE. Put those in, free CLE, and we'll get all of that stuff processed for you. Again, with that, I want to extend everybody a best wishes for the remainder of the week, and thank you very much for attending.